Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Hala Mahideen. Greece and Turkey are at odds over a host of issues, but the latest has pushed them closer to a military confrontation. Turkey has signed a deal with Libya that maps out a boundary in the east of the Mediterranean Sea. Greece has responded by expelling the Libyan ambassador and is bolstering its military in the area. There are fears the agreements will further complicate disputes over drilling for yet untapped oil and gas in waters around the ethnically divided island nation of Cyprus. Israel and Egypt are also involved in this increasingly bitter controversy. Well, the agreement between Turkey and Libya was signed at the end of last month. It basically draws a line in the eastern Mediterranean Sea between Turkey and Libya, cutting across a strip also claimed by Greece. Well, the maritime boundary separates what Turkey and Libya have agreed will be their exclusive economic zone. They say this gives them full rights to exploit natural resources, including oil and gas. Well, the deal comes as Turkish ships continue exploration and drilling activities in disputed waters around Cyprus. We'll bring in our guests shortly, but first, John Soropoulos reports from Athens.
The Greek foreign minister has summoned the Libyan ambassador to Athens and informed him this morning that he has 72 hours to leave the country. The Greek anger against Libya stems from not only the fact that Libya signed a treaty with Turkey which delineates an exclusive economic zone between those two countries that falls across what Greece sees as its own exclusive economic zone in the southeast Aegean and the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, but also because the Greek foreign minister had understood from his discussions with the Libyan ambassador and also with the Libyan foreign minister that this agreement would not be signed. So the Greek side expresses the feeling that there has been an element of deceit from the Libyan government, or at least that the Greek government was misled. The Greeks are also making contact with all of their key allies in the European Union and NATO, but also China and Russia and Israel, to gather as much international support as possible for the law of the sea, which in the Greek reading of it ascribes to islands a continental shelf and exclusive economic zone. If that reading of the law is correct, then Greece should have an exclusive economic zone that extends into the area that's now been divided between Libya and Turkey. Turkey has a different view. It does not believe that the international law of the sea necessarily gives islands an exclusive economic zone, and it has held to that position very consistently over the years. It also has condemned today the expulsion of the Libyan ambassador from Athens. The Greek side, we're given to understand by defense and foreign policy sources, has communicated to Turkey in no uncertain terms that should a Turkish exploration vessel enter the area that Greece deems as its own exclusive economic zone, then Greek naval forces will fire upon that vessel and sink it, with all of the repercussions that could follow from such an event.
Well, let's bring in today's guests. Joining us from London is Ege Seçkin, a political risk analyst focusing on Turkey at IHS Markets. In Istanbul, by Skype, Matthew Breiser, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre and Global Energy Centre, and a former US diplomat. And also joining us from London, Anas El-Gomati, General Director of the Sadek Institute, where he focuses on Libyan affairs. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. If I could start with you, Ege Seçkin. This is a controversial deal which has been proposed between Libya and Turkey. It's resulted in the expulsion of the Libyan ambassador from Greece. Why do you think this is so controversial? What's wrong with this deal?
Well, I won't say there's something necessarily wrong with it, but the controversy comes from the fact that this is Turkey's move against what has been an attempt to create a fait accompli on the southern side of its territories by a coalition of countries, including Greece, including Cyprus, and others. of course, having to do with the dispute over the hydrocarbon resources around Cyprus. In Cyprus, the Cypriot government has been moving forward with plans to exploit those resources in a manner that would end up excluding Turkey. And with this deal with the Libyan government, what Turkey is trying to do is basically leapfrog the territory which would be the eventual route of a planned pipeline into Europe from Cyprus. So this is Turkey's response in what has been a long story thus far.
Okay, let me take those points to Matthew Bryza. Matthew, nothing wrong with this deal. They're simply reacting to a fait accompli.
It very much depends who you are. Certainly, if you're Turkey, that is your view. You believe that because Greece decided to draw its maritime boundary in a way that you think is not in accordance with international law, whereby too much value is accorded to Crete, then you believe that Greece has taken over Libyan maritime territory, and then, as we just heard, has created a unified sort of collection of exclusive economic zones stretching from Cyprus all the way to Greece, where the pipeline could be built. If you're Greece, however, or Cyprus, or Egypt, you believe that Turkey, in fact, should be granting the island of Crete, the Greek island of Crete, greater force in determining the Greek maritime boundary. And in that case, it wouldn't be fair for this new boundary to be drawn. So where you stand is where you sit, as often happens in international law. And what ends up being right is simply what ends up being accepted as being right. But, you know, this is an actual agreement between two internationally recognized countries. And so while I'm not sure it will hold up in the long run, for now, Turkey and Libya have created a fait accompli.
So why do you think Greece is so unhappy then, if this is given that? Why are they so distressed to the point of expelling an ambassador?
Yeah. Well, number one, they want this pipeline, which, by the way, I think does not make economic sense. It's such a much longer, more expensive route than bringing a lot of that gas, especially from Israel to Turkey. But number two, there's a long history here of maritime disputes between Turkey and Greece. And the central component of that dispute is, again, how valuable are islands in determining the national coastline and the exclusive economic zone, which is not sovereign territory of a country, but it's where countries have exclusive rights. And this is such a testy issue between Turkey and Greece because many Greek islands abut right up practically against Turkey's coast. So if too much value is given to those islands in determining maritime boundaries, Turkey ends up risking getting bottled in and losing so many rights in the Mediterranean Sea that it otherwise would enjoy, and essentially cutting its maritime territory almost in half.
Okay, let's turn now to Anas El-Gamati. Anas, we're hearing this is a dispute between Turkey and Greece. Why is Libya getting involved?
Well, Libya is certainly the Johnny-come-lately to this kind of dispute and to this crowd of or crowded kind of conflict for such a long time. It's been more than a couple of years. It's been decades, as your earlier guests have indicated. But we can't wrench this from its original context. In Libya's case, it's been involved in a conflict for the last 8 months, where there have been a number of different challenges to the sovereignty, to the even existentially to the Libyan government, to its base in Tripoli, from Khalifa Haftar, who is supported by many countries within the EU or many countries within the UN Security Council, who have not kind of lived up to the expectations here diplomatically. The Libyan government in Tripoli is the internationally recognized government by the EU, by the UN, but the UN and the EU have stood by idly as Khalifa Haftar has been bombing the capital, Tripoli, and has been incurring into the southern neighborhoods of Tripoli. So in that sense, Libya has kind of waded into a conflict, but it has waded in effectively because its problems are busting at the seams for the last 8 months. And the first of them is, why is the UN and why are the EU sitting by idly and not supporting a government that it brought into existence? And then number two, if that is going to be the case, I think the Libyan government is perhaps smiling at the fact that there is a moral outrage and diplomatic outrage and silence about the moral outrage and diplomatic outrage over what is happening in Libya. So I think in that respect, it's the most pertinent of problems. But I think Libya's role here is not only that it is going to contest and perhaps never in its lifetime even bring anything meaningful to a deal that may not transpire with Turkey. But the very fact that it contests it disrupts the kind of confidence that international oil companies need to be able to explore in that area, to be able to explore the valuable treasures underneath the water. And without that being solved, there is no way in hell that any international oil company was going to go in and try to explore for gas. So I think in that respect, it's kind of mission accomplished for the Turks and Libyans.
But would you say then, Anna, this isn't a serious proposal? This is a cry for help from Libya to help. This isn't to do with oils and hydrocarbons. It's to do with we want help with this civil war that we're in, and nobody is coming to our aid.
Well, it's a theatre of conflict right now, and it's become almost like a pantomime. The very fact that the international community's silence with what is happening in Libya has really forced their hand, because this deal has so much more to do with the defence accords and the security arrangements that will be built on the back of this deal with Libya and between Libya and Turkey. In that respect, they need to be able to bring in weapons. They need to be able to bring in a partner that will help them. And Turkey kind of, stretched out its hand and gave Libya that lifeline that it was looking for. And I think that's the real basis as to why Libya has waded into this conflict. And I think that's the reason why there is so much moral outrage, but it's selective. And I think that's the problem that many will find today, particularly as Libya goes towards its 8th or 9th month and the international community begins to look at ways in which it wants to solve the crisis. It has to look at the international partners and actors that are involved in this. And Libya has now kind of played its hand as sitting back for the last 8-9 months, hoping that the UN will do something, hoping that the European Union will do something. And I think it's played a much more forceful hand in this respect, and it's shown a bit more teeth.